from Pearl Property Co. And I've got Adam with me today from Rise by Property Buyers, and we're going to have a chat about Adam's top 3 tips for anyone who is looking to purchase an investment property. So we will just start with his number 1 tip for now, and we'll delve into that in some detail so that you can actually get some key takeaway points. We're going to pick Adam's brain, the wealth of knowledge on all things, investment purchasing, and then we will do some other videos where we go into tip number 2 and tip number 3 as well. So first of all, thank you for coming, and let us know what is your first tip number 1 for anyone looking to buy an investment property.
Yeah, thanks Anita. So I guess one of my main tips, tip number 1, one of the main points that we look at when we're buying property for our clients is looking for a high land content in high growth areas, right? Because typically, we're investing in property to gain capital value, and to do that we're looking to buy in suburbs that have high growth. So one of the main points that we look at is to have a high land to asset ratio.
Right. So what does that mean, high land to asset ratio? Is this because, I think you've mentioned to me before, when you're buying a property you're essentially buying 2 assets?
Exactly, yeah. So typically you're exactly doing that. You're buying 2 assets, and one is the land component, and the other is the building asset. So the building asset is actually decreasing in value. Every year it goes down in value slightly. We try to maintain that value by you yourself maintaining the property and putting money into the property and keeping that maintenance up. But the land component of that property is increasing, and that's why we're investing in property, because of that land component. So typically we're looking to have a minimum of 50 to 60% of the asset value of the land.
Right.
So 50 to 60% of the total value being at the land component. So if a property was worth maybe $1 million, we'd want the land component to be at least $500,000 to $600,000.
Right.
So that's really important. We don't want to be buying a small villa that's brand new with a small land component that has a low land value and a high building value, because essentially that building's just going to decrease in value and you're left with a small land component. So
that makes a lot of sense. We all know that like cars, building values can depreciate over time. And there obviously you can add value to the building, which we can go into in another session. But so the key point being that you want to make sure that you're getting the ratio correct when you're buying land and house in the right area. So talking now about buying in the right area, you mentioned before high growth suburbs. So typically, what are the factors that make a suburb a high growth suburb?
Yeah, there's so many factors that contribute to growth in a suburb, and a lot of the typical factors are proximity to the CBD. Everyone wants to be quite close to the CBD.
Not in the city, but close enough to get there every day for work, for anyone who doesn't have the benefit of working from home, I guess.
Exactly, or at least have the ability to get to the city quite easily, and those points would be being near the freeway and having good access to the freeway. Train lines, exactly. We're also looking at things like future infrastructure projects that might contribute to the value of that suburb increasing, and that might be, for example, the Ocean Reef Marina, which is a great project for the Perth coastline. So a lot of people want to position themselves in that suburb so they can take advantage of that when it's fully built. Yeah,
exactly. And it's important to factor in things, because there may be something planned in that suburb that may not be so favourable as well on the flip side of things as well. So it is really important to have an idea of what the future plans are and development, I guess, is for that suburb. Another example that we have spoken about previously was the Karrinyup shopping precinct. So that again is something that's probably added value to the homes that are within close proximity of Karrinyup Shopping Centre, and makes it quite appealing as a family suburb to be near.
100%. I mean, that's definitely a lifestyle factor. People want to be near that shopping precinct so they can go out on a Friday night and have a few drinks and take the family down there and go to the restaurant and enjoy a movie or something like that. So that's definitely an addition to the lifestyle. So that's why people want to be in that area. And you've also got the beach in Karrinyup or near Karrinyup. So that's a really
the beach is a big one for people in Perth, isn't it? I mean,
it is.
getting a home near the coast is the dream, I think, for so many of us in Perth, probably all over Australia, but particularly Perth. We're pretty spoiled with our coastline here. So I guess it's places that are near that, have that appeal of being close to a nice stretch of beach would definitely have an impact on the growth value.
Oh, totally. And a lot of people don't even go to the beach, but they want to be near a beach. So just the idea of being close to it, and all of the social activities that go along with being near the beach, whether it's cafes and bars and restaurants and those sort of things that contribute to lifestyle. So I think it's a big advantage being near the beach. Plus, Perth's a very hot city, so we want to have that sea breeze coming in to cool the hot summer afternoons. Yeah,
100%. And when we're talking about finding a suburb that is going to experience growth, does it matter if that suburb has already had proven growth? Does that mean it's not going to grow anymore, or are we looking for areas that have not yet experienced growth? So how do we know? Is that a big factor? If a suburb's already had growth, does that generally mean it's not going to have any more, or does that mean we're likely to see more?
So it's a good question, Anita. I think typically you'd want to look at the long-term growth of that, the historical growth of a certain suburb, and that would be kind of governed by your budget as well. So those really strong growing suburbs, Wembley Downs, City Beach, Scarborough's a really good one as well. So they're typically going to have strong growth going forward in the future. But you've also got to look at the ripple suburbs, the suburbs that get an effect from the ripple effect, I guess. So property prices, people will get outpriced in a certain suburb and then start looking in surrounding suburbs, and Craig is probably a good example of that. It's a little bit cheaper. I think people get priced out of suburbs close by and they want to move into those cheaper suburbs.
Well, we've definitely seen this before with Duncraig and Careen, for example. They've certainly experienced a higher volume of growth, probably based on people being sort of locked out, I guess, for lack of a better term, of the suburbs like Trigg and Sorrento and Hillary's. They've then gone to that next suburb over, and we've seen, Careen and Duncraig, the value in those suburbs has really soared over the last couple of years. And so when you think about that, we talk about being locked out of a suburb and that pushing the value of the nearby suburbs up. For the suburbs around Hillary's, for example, Padbury and Craigie are certainly sitting in between a pocket of high value suburbs.
100%.
So you sort of think, okay, and Calgary was another one that we sort of maybe thought may have that sort of same impact as well, flowing on from those, Hillary, Sorrento, Mullaloo, we were saying. So interesting that's something to look for as well when you're talking about growth in a suburb.
Yeah, 100%. And as young families move into those suburbs, they start pumping money into those suburbs as well, renovating their homes, adding value. So as you drive around the streets, the streetscape's starting to look a little bit nicer, which further attracts more people into those suburbs, and then the property values increase as well. So and that effect keeps rolling out into the suburbs. Starts jumping onto the other side of the freeway. Greenwood is a great example, and also Marangaroo. So
you do see that kind of flow-on effect.
Yeah, definitely, and that ripple effect is evident in a lot of suburbs around Perth. Yeah,
that's really good to know, and something to keep an eye on when you are sort of trying to find a property that's going to deliver on the growth. And I guess is there some other indicators that can provide evidence of when a suburb is set to have growth? So when there's properties on the market, what sort of key things are you looking for when you're looking at those properties? What key indicators are there around that suburb?
Yeah, so we kind of look at a few indicators, the leading market indicators that will tell if a suburb is going to experience growth in the near term, and things like days on market. We want to have a low days on market, and that's how quickly, a measurement of how quickly a property is selling within a suburb. So the days on market in a lot of the suburbs around here is extremely low at the moment. So if that's decreasing, then generally it means that a suburb is getting hotter and hotter. People are trying to get into that suburb. So it's a bit of a leading indicator to growth. And another one would be vacancy rate. So
in terms of the rental vacancy rate.
Yeah, exactly. When that vacancy rate is tightening, it just proves that a lot of people are wanting to move into that suburb, and demand for those suburbs are getting higher. So that's another leading indicator that we look at.
And at the moment, of course, the Perth vacancy rate is ridiculously low and has been for quite some time. So what we're talking about is not just the vacancy rate that is being experienced that is quite unusual at the moment, but even in a typical market that hasn't been heavily affected by COVID, we're wanting to look for a suburb that has a low vacancy rate. So for anyone looking at the moment, just keep that in mind as well. It's not just about today's vacancy rate, but how that suburb performs in terms of vacancy rate in a normal market as well.
Exactly. And one thing that doesn't change as quickly is the amount of owner occupiers in a suburb. We're kind of looking at least 30% or 70% owner occupiers within a suburb, preferably 80% even. So we want a small amount of rental pool in that suburb. So that's another stat that we're looking at.
Is that what's the reason for that? Is there a particular reason why it's good to have a certain percentage of home ownership within that suburb? Does that mean there's more money sort of spent in the suburb? Is that what you're sort of implying with that?
Yeah, exactly. Homeowners typically will spend more on their property. They're going to look after it and maintain it a lot more diligently than what a tenant would do, I guess. Not only that, when an owner occupier is looking to buy in a suburb, they're going to pay more money. They're emotionally attached to that property, and they'll pay a little bit higher than what an investor might pay for that property.
And I guess typically being a homeowner, you do tend to spend more time and money on that property over a period of time. Investors, they do add value to the property, but as you say, there's not the emotion there, so they're not likely to spend as much money making the house look nice as someone who owns the property. So the higher the ratio of home ownership, generally the better presented that sort of property is or that suburb is in terms of street appeal.
Yes.
Okay, right, that makes sense. Is there anything else to factor in terms of the leading indicators when we're talking about potential up and coming growth?
I think online listing demand is another big one that we look at, because it kind of indicates how many people are out there looking for property within that suburb, and obviously in this digital age that's a number that you can track quite easily. So if there's a lot of people looking for property in that suburb, it typically means that there could be potential for growth in those suburbs. So you look at all these factors and you can track them in specific software that we have, and we can kind of look at all these factors and try and determine which suburbs might be exposed to growth in the future.
And so for someone who's a client with yourself, you can obviously generate all this information and find this information. For anybody who's just starting the journey of looking for an investment property, there's access to this sort of information through suburb profiles on REWA, and I think maybe realestate.com and domain.com possibly do them as well, but you can get some generalised data about the profile of the people living within that suburb from having a look at those. They've got little data sort of analysis of each suburb available, so it's a good place to have a look if you're just sort of trying to get a feel for what the suburb is like and what the makeup of that suburb is, to see whether it does have any of those growth indicators that you're looking for when we're talking about buying an investment property.
Yeah, that's right. It's all pretty accessible now online. You can just go to there's quite a few websites that give you that data on tap, really, so it's pretty easy to find. But the data is truncated in a way that it leaves space for professionals to access paid software to access that data in a much wider format and a lot more detail.
So a good starting point, but there's certainly more information that can be built around that through someone like yourself.
Yeah, that's right. And as a first-time investor, people can go online and look for that data and decipher them for themselves. But as I said, there's a wider pool of data that you can access as well.
Awesome. Well, I hope that you guys have found that helpful. So just to recap, Adam's top tip was basically to make sure that the value of the land is in correct proportion with the value of the property as well. So making sure that the land content with the property that you're purchasing is up there, is a good 50 to 60%.
Yeah, at least 50 to 60%. That's typically what we're after, but keeping in mind that we want the building to be decent quality enough to be able to rent
it out. Exactly. Awesome, well thank you so much for that, and we look forward to bringing you guys some more helpful tips. We're looking forward to tip number 2 and 3 from you shortly.
Thanks, Anita.